Number 1.
On the morning of February 10, 1987, Margie Pandos did not hear the shower running, which was unusual because her daughter, 15-year-old Jennifer Lynn Pandos, should have been getting ready for school. Jennifer was a sophomore at Lafayette High School in Williamsburg, Virginia, and the family lived in the Kingsmill area of Williamsburg. Margie and her husband, Ron, knocked on Jennifer's bedroom door, but she didn't answer. They tried opening the door, only to discover it was locked. The parents forced their way into their daughter's bedroom, but their daughter was not there. Lying on Jennifer's bed was a note. "Your daughter's with me. She's fine. She's having some problems and needs some time away." The note then switched to first person. "I'm fine, I just need time to think. Both of you please go to work tomorrow cause I will try to call you. I won't call you at home, only at one of y'all's work. Do not call the police. I can easily find out if you do. I may never come back home. Don't tell my friends about this. Just tell them that I'm sick." The parents immediately noticed the last part of the note was not Jennifer's handwriting. They looked around the room and noticed that the only item Jennifer took with her was her purse, no other personal belongings. A Venetian blind in Jennifer's room appeared as if someone had been peering out, either waiting for another person or ensuring nobody was around. Jennifer appeared to have left her home through a sliding glass door on the patio. Margie and Ron initially followed Jennifer's instructions, but then notified the police when she didn't call. For the next several months, family members went door to door handing out flyers, trying to find anyone who might have seen Jennifer. About a month after she disappeared, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children took up Jenny's case, sending her photograph out across the country. Tips started coming in, but did not lead anywhere. Police believed that Jennifer, who was left-handed, wrote part of the note with her right hand. The handwriting itself looked like a child wrote it, suggesting the writer used the opposite hand to write the message. Police labeled Jennifer a runaway from the start and believed she voluntarily left her home that night. As time passed, though, they feared she met with foul play at some point. She never made contact with her family. The reason Jennifer would have left voluntarily remains a mystery. There were no problems at home, and Jennifer did not abuse drugs or alcohol. She was not involved in any fights with her parents or friends, although she might have been distraught over a breakup with her boyfriend, Tony Tobler. In 1989, a Pennsylvania man said he had been with a prostitute in New York City who told him her last name was Pandos. The girl had been working the streets for about a year, and it was apparent someone had beaten her. Detectives were unable to confirm the sighting. Jennifer remains missing to this day, and the police are still investigating her case. As far as I can tell, it appears that Jennifer's parents are still alive. Her mom now lives in North Carolina, and her father is in Texas.
Number 2.
Every time novelist Marissa Mackall goes for a walk in the Dublin Mountains, she finds herself asking, "Annie, where are you?" It's nearly 30 years since her friend, Annie McCarrick, disappeared without a trace on a day trip to Enniscorthy in March 1993, a few years after the American arrived in Ireland to study. Haunting footage of a carefree Annie delightedly thanking her nana so much for the money that she had sent to her in Dublin forms the opening frames in a new documentary on the enduring mystery. The only child of parents with strong Irish links, she is described as bright, beautiful, good-humored, confident, outgoing. There have been many theories over the decades, but with no crime scene, and in those days of scarce CCTV footage, Gardaí spent the initial weeks of the investigation following up over 100 tips and taking dozens of statements. In a new Scandal documentary, Mackall, who waitressed with Annie in the Courtyard restaurant in Donnybrook, says she believes her friend is somewhere in the Dublin Mountains. "When I'm up there, I say a prayer for Annie. I just hope that one day somebody will find something," she says. "My personal belief is that there was a serial killer. It is a theory shared by one of the main detectives on the original case. It definitely wasn't a coincidence that a number of women traveling on their own went missing in the east of the country," says retired Detective Garda Thomas Rock. "Looking back on it now, it looks like it could have been the same person." One of the major difficulties in solving a case like this is you have no crime scene, you have no body, you have no material evidence. That definitely tells me that the person who carried it out was meticulous and had thought the thing through. The 27-year-old was last seen alive on Friday, March 26, 1993 as she boarded a bus headed for Enniskerry in the foothills of the Wicklow Mountains. When Gardaí first began investigating Annie's disappearance, they treated it as a missing person case as there was no evidence of foul play. Initially, a bouncer in Johnny Fox's, a pub about 6 kilometers from Enniskerry, claimed to have seen her in the company of a man in the pub that night, but the former detective says it is hard to come to a definitive conclusion on one identification. The identification never rang true with Mackle. "I don't believe Annie was ever in Johnny Fox's," she says. Annie would not have spent the night drinking in Johnny Fox's with a stranger. She would not have spent the night drinking with anybody. That was always, to me, a very unlikely story. Annie was a very noticeable girl, and knowing her personality, she would have spoken to the people around her. Mr. Rock remembers the McCarrick family coming to Ireland as hundreds of volunteers searched for any trace of Annie. They were very worried and anxious parents, and they took a very proactive role in the investigation, he says. "We set up a mobile communications center out at Johnny Fox's and we carried out massive searches of the Dublin and Wicklow Mountains. But whoever took her made sure there was nothing left. Some people don't realize the massive size of the Wicklow and Dublin Mountains. It's only when you go up there that you realize the size of that area, the remoteness of it, and the probability that a body could be buried up there and never found. We had sightings of her where people came forward and said they had given her a lift or brought her here and there, and we had to follow up every single lead. The whole focus of the investigation for the first couple of weeks was trying to find out where had she gone. It's different in an investigation where you have a scene and a body." As time went on, the family brought in a private investigator who brought in a psychic medium, and they also offered a reward for information. It was a very intense and massive investigation. The U.S. State Department in Washington also got involved, the former detective says. In the years that followed, Annie's disappearance began to be linked to the cases of other women who went missing in the east of the country, which led to the setting up of Operation Trace. There were similarities between 3 of the women that went missing. There was Annie McCarrick, Jojo Dullard, and then there was Deirdre Jacob, 3 women on their own, just out walking, and then they suddenly disappeared and were never seen again, Mr. Rock says. The documentary also details how Larry Murphy, who remains a person of interest in the case, was arrested in February 2000 for the kidnap, rape and attempted murder of a young woman in the Wicklow Mountains. She was rescued when 2 hunters stumbled upon the horrific scene, and Murphy was later sentenced to 15 years in jail. Mr. Rock says that without evidence, you have no court case. As a detective, you have to work with what you have. You can have thoughts about who may or may not be responsible. As a detective, you have to work with what you have. You can have thoughts about who may or may not be responsible. Kenneth Strange, a former FBI agent and McCarrick family friend, helped and advised them and took an active interest in the case on the 10th anniversary. "My gut tells me that she made her way to Enniskerry and she met someone there or was approached by someone there who maybe asked her for directions, and then, by that time, it's over," he says. "I would call that person a psychopath. These are people who act alone. They have a place where they know they are going to dispose of the body." Nearly 30 years on, Annie's mother, Nancy, is still waiting for answers, but her father, John, died in 2009 without ever finding out what happened to his only child.
Number 3.
Danette and Jeanette Milbrook, twin sisters from Augusta, Georgia, vanished on March 18, 1990. Their mother, Mary Sturgis, had expected them back home by nightfall. They were 15 years old and freshmen at Lucy C. Laney High School. And they're said to be the only set of twins to go missing in the United States whose disappearance remains unresolved. Mary and the twins' younger sister, Shanta, went out to look for them on foot, but after they had walked around a while with no success, they went home and the girl's mom called the police. Whoever answered told them they had to wait 24 hours before they could report anyone missing. After 24 hours had passed, Mary called back and was put through to a detective who told her she remembers they probably ran away. Statistics show that kidnappings account for a minuscule portion of missing kids. In 2018, less than 1% of more than 25,000 reported cases were characterized as non-family abductions, according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, but Mary didn't think for a second that her daughters had taken off by themselves. Police didn't do nothing, Mary, who many call Miss Louise, recalls in the new Oxygen special The Disappearance of the Millbrook Twins, premiering Saturday at 7 p.m. adds Danette and Jeanette's sister Shanta, anybody that was our color was a runaway. Meanwhile, their father, John Millbrook, never wanted to look for them, according to Shanta Sturgis, who says that he told her older sister to tell police he was dead if they came looking for him. He had so many mixed emotions over the years, she says, but I do know, if that had been my kid's father, I knew I would have wanted him to be involved in wanting to look for his kids. It would be more than 2 decades before the twins started getting the amount of attention that Mary and Shanta felt should have been paid to them from the beginning. On the morning of March 18, 1990, the girls went to church with their family. Around lunchtime they picked up lunch at a church's chicken and took it home, where Jeanette told their mother that a white van had been following them. Mary looked outside, but didn't see any white van. The twins left the house again at around 3 p.m. and headed to their godfather's house to get money for their bus fare, riding the city bus being how they got to and from school. Jeanette and Danette left their godfather's place on Forest Street and made at least 2 more stops to see a young cousin and their older sister. They ended up at gas station convenience store near the corner of 12th Street and Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, where they bought chips and a drink. After that, the trail runs cold. Their 16th birthday came and went. Jeanette, she was a cautious person, and she was a good student, Mary recalled to local news Channel 6 in 2018. Danette was a good child too. In April 1991, an investigator informed the family that the girls could no longer be compelled to return home, police apparently still entertaining the possibility that they had run away. The family later confirmed to the local CBS News 12 that someone had called police to report seeing the girls leaving. Leaving what? The neighborhood? The city? The state? Wasn't explained, and that was all they needed to consider the case closed, barely a year after Danette and Jeanette first went missing. In 1993, someone informed the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children to report that the twins had been found. Eventually the original case file disappeared too. And that was that. No case, no file, no more resources dedicated to trying to find out what happened. Sturgis, who was 12 when her sisters disappeared, started a quest to get the case reopened in 2004, regularly calling the sheriff's department and trying to get local law enforcement involved. I had been trying for years to get the police to help us look for them, and I was always told there was nothing they could do, she told the Huffington Post in 2013. They said the case was closed and there was no missing children report. But she didn't give up, and on June 5, 2013, Richmond County Sheriff Richard Roundtree, who had just been elected in 2012, announced he was reopening the case. "We think a terrible injustice has been done for the last 20 years, he told the Huffington Post at the time. For some unknown reason they were removed from the system, but there is no report indicating why they were removed. So for the last 20 years they have not been in the system." Added Sturgis, "I figured someone was bound to listen. I finally got the sheriff on the phone, and the next day he told me he was going to reopen the case. But, as she told News 12 this month, so from 1991 to 2013, nobody was looking for my sisters. Nobody. Not the sheriff. Nobody. Period. Nobody but family."
Number 4.
Johnny Gosch was 12 years old in 1982. Like countless other 12-year-old boys across the country, he had a paper route to earn money. He would get up before the sun rose each morning and deliver newspapers in West Des Moines, Iowa, which then had a population of around 22,000. Gosch had never delivered a paper late, and when on the morning of September 5 his parents began receiving phone calls from neighbors asking what had happened to their papers, they realized something was amiss. John and Noreen Gosch frantically alerted the local police. However, since there had been no note or demand for ransom, the police ruled that the case was not a kidnapping and waited 72 hours before declaring Johnny missing and beginning the search in earnest. In the meantime, John had been combing the neighborhood for his son and found his delivery wagon filled with the undelivered newspapers around a block and a half away from the house. It was the last trace of Johnny Gosch that would ever be found. Johnny Gosch's disappearance quickly made headlines across the country thanks to the efforts of Johnny's parents. Frustrated with the sluggish response of law enforcement, John and Noreen went on television and distributed over 10,000 posters with their son's picture. Gosch was even one of the first children to be plastered on the side of milk cartons throughout the United States in an effort to raise awareness about missing children. Although the Gosch's massive efforts ensured word of their son's abduction was spread, it also attracted unwanted attention in the form of cruel crank calls and false trails. There seemed to be a lead early in the case when the private investigators hired by the Gosches found two witnesses who reported seeing their son talking to a man in a blue car on the morning of his disappearance. However, without a license plate to go on, the trail quickly ran cold. 2 years later, another paperboy, Eugene Martin, went missing in Iowa, but police were never able to connect the two cases. No arrests or charges were ever made in the Johnny Gosch case, but the mystery was far from over. In 1997, 15 years after Johnny Gosch's disappearance, Noreen Gosch awoke to a knock on her door at 2:30 a.m. Although the unexpected visitor pulled open his shirt to reveal a familiar birthmark on his chest, Noreen claimed she recognized the visitor right away. The man was her now 27-year-old son Johnny. According to Noreen, he was accompanied by a man she had never seen before. Although she spoke with her son for over an hour, Johnny would look over to the other person for approval to speak. The long-missing boy supposedly told his mother he was still in danger and refused to disclose where he was living before vanishing once again. Noreen went to the FBI and had them create a sketch of her now adult son, but the lack of evidence besides her own word led the authorities to doubt that Johnny was still alive. Noreen firmly believes that Johnny was abducted as part of a child sex ring and that the investigation was hampered because of the big names involved in the scheme. The authorities have not denied that this theory is impossible, but Des Moines police said they have no evidence to suggest that Johnny was swept into a pedophile ring. Noreen and her husband never gave up hope that their missing son was alive, once stating in an interview, "We've lived without Johnny a long time now. It's not new to us, but it still hurts." Noreen Gosch was often dismissed as a grieving mother driven to outlandish conclusions and stories after the disappearance of her son. However, she and her husband certainly helped ensure that missing child cases were handled with greater urgency. In 1984, Iowa passed the Johnny Gosch Bill, which required police to investigate missing child cases immediately, rather than wait 72 hours as they had in Gosch's case. Despite the important legislative changes and tremendous media campaign, besides his newspaper wagon, no trace of Gosch was ever found.